Heard here. All right, so I am now recording. Hey, everybody in the recorded world. So I'm going to share my screen. And like I said, I want to start off with um, having a, sorry, I just want to get everything so I can see it. Having with a brief discussion. You guys uh, hopefully can see that. Can you guys see the question on the screen? Thank you, Sheila. You're the only one's face I can see. So and I'll put the captions on just because they might be useful for some. So I wanted to have just a very casual, open discussion, and this is a chance, of course, where you can get those CP3 points if you'd like. And the idea here isn't to have some. This is about just sort of allowing us a space to sort of talk and open up and start talking a little bit about thinking about how technology shapes and relates to our lives and affects our lives. I mean, obviously, it's something. I mean, we're kind of in a high technology era, um, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I wanted to focus a little bit on education. I know this might seem. I hesitated to do this because it might seem a little nauseating to talk about education right now, since it's something that we're all sort of wrapped up in to no end. Um, but it's also something I thought that we could talk about because it's something that we know quite well. We all, you know, um, have had some form of education leading up to, and not to mention the education that we're getting now in terms of college. But I wanted to think about college prior to this, or think about education prior to college, I should say. So the first question I just had, I think I have four questions here, maybe just three. But prior to the global pandemic, so prior to all this, uh, these challenging times and this madness and of education going completely online, which I assume probably happened while you were in high school, if you were in high school during that time. But prior to that, okay, so back to normal times, if we can, quote unquote, normal times, if we can remember those times. Does anybody have any ideas or thoughts about how technology enhanced their education, mean made it better, or um, felt like technology? And doesn't have to be something major, right? It could be like, in your school, you guys, you had a computer lab or whatever that really helped, or maybe you did some sort of project in high school and you collaborated with other people using Google Docs or whatever. It doesn't have to be some major technology, right? And that's something important to keep in mind as we go into our papers, and we'll talk about that later as well. But are there any ideas out there about how technology enhanced your learning prior to all this global pandemic? And I don't care if we're talking kindergarten, elementary school, middle school, um, high school, of course. Are there any good stories out there about technology helping your education? And we'll get to the bad stories.
Yeah, I guess I could say what enhanced my education with technology was having the teachers when they would use the smart board to pull up their PowerPoints and go through it. That just helped me a lot.
So, is there a difference between? I think there is a difference, isn't there? First of all, thank you for that. And there is a difference between like a smart board and a PowerPoint, right?
Yeah.
I've never used a smart board. What is a smart board?
It's basically just something you could project the PowerPoint on on the board on the whiteboard it doesn't have those uneven lines and I don't know, it just makes it more
Hmm.
perfect. And then you can also have you can draw on it and stuff or underline.
Right. And it's like a digital,
Yeah.
like when I draw on it, it's like a digital pen, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Why did you, if you don't mind, and I think you said it, and maybe I didn't quite hear it. Why would it just made things more interesting, or why did you like or appreciate that? Why did you feel like it enhanced it?
I feel like it was kind of more
Hmm,
interactive and um I don't know, seeing it visually and explaining it was like better for me.
okay, excellent. Other ideas about, even if they're not as dramatic. I mean, Trevor says in chat that you're able to have graphics classes and photography classes. And I assume what you mean is that, I mean, not only having the materials, I guess, and the tools to do that, but also, I mean, talking about photography, not only taking pictures, but I assume you're developing pictures and you're learning that whole process, or maybe it was purely digital. I don't know. But even in that case, if I'm dealing with digital photography, then I'm have the tools with which to um, sort of edit photographs and Photoshop them, and you can tell I'm not very versed in these things. So absolutely, I mean, one thing with technology is that it really opens up. I mean, when I was in high school, and nothing against wood shop, but we had wood shop, and so in some sense there was technology. I was using all kinds of saws and planers and sanders and things like that. And that obviously that was very nice to have. But we didn't have the school that I had in high school. It didn't have a whole lot of money, didn't have a ton of money. So, we had a lot of sort of materials like that. We didn't have a whole lot of computers. Of course, I'm going to high school. Of course, we're talking early 90s. Graduated high school in 1993. But so in some sense, it was nice to have a wood shop where I could actually go and build things and learn how to create things with my hands. That was something that was really cool, and I didn't even really think about that until Trevor mentioned this. But um, in some sense, I was also aware that the high school across town, where I grew up, had like computers and computer labs and stuff like that, and computer printing and computer design or graphic design classes. We didn't really have the money for that at the high school that I went to. So absolutely, things like tools like that and specialty tools, I guess, for lack of a better word, are certainly ways in which you can open up the curriculum. Like, okay, yeah, you can take a graphic design class, or you can take a digital photography class, or you can take a traditional photography class. For us, it was wood shop or home ec, and we had typewriters. Anyways, sound like grandpa talking about walking uphill in the snow. Any other ideas? Cool. Those are a couple of really interesting ideas about how technology enhanced one's education.
There's a website I used. I don't know. This is not before Corona. This is actually after, because I started using online textbooks, and I needed
Okay.
to submit like review answers. Like there was like questions I had to answer from the textbook,
Mm,
and I found that a
hmm.
website that I could edit the PDF of the textbook and just like fill in my answers. It was called Kami.
Spelled
So
how, Mal? How do you spell it?
Kami.
Okay. So it's
Yeah,
kind of like you could almost personalize the textbook yourself. I mean, it's like writing in a book, but obviously digitally. Yeah.
yeah. So it basically lets you insert like text into it and
Hmm.
stuff.
Why did you like, I mean, if you can explain it,
Because
why did
honestly,
you feel that that was better than sort of just like having a regular traditional textbook?
I mean, first I found the textbook for free, so I was like, I'll just take it online, and then
Yeah, absolutely.
on top of that, I had to hand it in online, so I'd rather type it instead of handwrite. 'Cause my handwriting's not that good, and I'd rather type.
Yeah, and you know what, Malik, thanks for bringing that up. That actually brings something that's really important up. And again, thinking about sort of having this conversation as a way to sort of think about our papers. One is, a lot of times, the consequences of technology can be things that are very practical. In other words, that enhance, maybe makes it sound like, how does it sort of make your education wondrous? But sort of like, a couple of points that Malik's bringing up, is just a matter of convenience. Like, it's like, well, first of all, I'm with you, Malik. My handwriting is illegible. I have terrible handwriting, and I'm sure, I guarantee you, mine's. We can have a competition, but mine is probably 1,000 times worse than yours. I can guarantee you that.
Nah, I don't think
Um, I mean, so in some sense, things can be really practical. Like, not only did it give access for Malik, like he's like, well, I found the book for free, so school became a little bit cheaper. It became a little more affordable, and those things become really important when we start talking about, leveling the playing field, if you will, across, a whole class diversity of populations, right? So, I mentioned in my high school that the high school across town had a lot more money than my high school. Even my middle school, or my elementary school, I should say, there was an elementary school in my town that was in the kind of rich private neighborhood, or the really wealthy private neighborhood. And so they had a lot of families donating a lot of money to that school. I don't think they got like state funds that were much different from my school, my elementary school. And it's not like they had a bunch of extra toys, and like, I mean, I think they did again, even in elementary school. I mean, computers were around then, not that old, but and they did have computers there, but they just had like, access to materials. Like they could afford, whatever textbooks, or they could afford literary texts or whatever they were studying. And this particularly played out in terms of, and some of you wrote about this particularly played out in terms of athletics. Like, their sports teams, like their soccer team would show up and play our soccer team, and their soccer team had like nice jerseys, and I think they even had lockers like in elementary school, and they had probably even like a gym or whatever. I don't know what they had. They had like, I never went over to that school, drove by it a number of times when I got older, but um, they were so much better put together than we were as far as an athletic team. And so it's important to think about small things like that, right? I mean, if a textbook can be accessible and is free, then that opens up the opportunity for those, not just for those who can afford really expensive textbooks, and textbooks tend to be ridiculously expensive, but it allows access, and then also just convenience. Like Malik said, like he had to turn the work in online anyway, so might as well type it right directly in the textbooks, and I can just submit it that way, and I just submit the worksheet and it's all done. So things can be really practical in terms of things, how they enhance or will enhance the education. So let's think about the other side of this, and maybe, and if you have a comment that you want to answer, number one, again, you can put it in the chat or raise your voice, whatever you feel more comfortable doing. Sort of, let's take a look at the other side. How do you feel the technology, if you felt this way, hindered or limited your education? I am going to talk about today. I am going to talk about what's going on with the pandemic. So we're going to talk about challenges with technology today and enhancements. But I mean, prior to the pandemic, so we will talk about the pandemic thing, but prior to the global pandemic, how did technology serve to hinder or limit your education? Meaning, do you feel like there were times where technology was an interruption to your education, or made things more difficult than they needed to be, or made them less effective than you felt like they could be? Everything was wonderful. But let me ask you guys this. One of the familiar news stories, right? And I say that with a little bit of a tone there, because one of the things we talk about, you hear a lot about on the sort of nightly news, if you will, is the way in which cell phones are making us stupid, or the way cell phones are leading to addiction, the way that cell phones are too distracting for us to get our work done. Do you guys feel that any of those things are true, or that's the case?
Yeah, I definitely think that's true on
Okay.
the distraction part.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I think I would agree, Malik. I mean, I didn't have a cell phone again, sort of showing my age here. Didn't have a cell phone when I was in high school, but everybody had like pagers and it was that long ago. And I remember pagers like being, people's pagers would go off in the middle of class, and that's sort of nothing compared to. But I remember students even just leaving in the middle of class and going to like make a phone call on a payphone 1,000 years ago again. But even today, I mean, and even prior to the pandemic, like my wife gets very annoyed with me because I tend to sort of be a little bit. I will put my cell phone like over in the other room, because I don't want it to distract me, because then I don't trust myself, because I know if there's a lull in the work I'm doing or when I'm writing, I'm going to look at it, or if I get a message or something like that, or I get a notification, it's just no doubt that I'm going to go pick it up. Um, uh, so my wife gets annoyed with me because, she's trying to text me. And I think we're so used to, I think that's one other difference. Sure, there's a matter of distraction, but I think another aspect of that is the way in which the technology like gives us this expectation of immediate response, or you know quick response at least. My wife often gets frustrated with me because she'll text me, at noon, let's say, and then I'll be busy doing something and I won't answer until 2, 3, 4. Because I'm in my sort of, it's been one of my sort of forced habits or disciplines where I just say like, okay, the phone's gone for 2 hours, 3 hours. And in some ways that's not cool, because my wife's like, we have a kid, and if anything happens, we need to. I'm like, okay, but that's people had kids before there were cell phones, and how did they manage then? Anyway, um, other ideas about it doesn't just have to be about cell phones, but how technology served to hinder or limit your education prior to this pandemic thing.
About when like technical difficulties, maybe if like internet connections, something like that.
Yeah, I think certainly a situation where if a class is super wired, for lack of a better term, right? If you have a class that's, like right now, if everything goes down, the internet goes down on my end, Zoom shuts down. I mean, we're out of luck pretty much. I mean, or just, if I'm somebody who really struggles, and many times I do, if as a teacher, if I'm somebody who really struggles with handling technology and getting it to work and starting it and all that stuff, it can really sort of be interruptive, and in itself be more of uh, a not only a distraction, but more of an interruption than it can be sort of creating a sense of continuity or community in the class. I would say for sure. So absolutely, I think there's a way in which technology can be, sort of overindulged, where it can really sort of be, then you have students who are like, okay, I mean, you all had to learn Canvas while you're also learning to go to college, so to speak. You all had to, I mean, it's not like Canvas is too complicated, but Canvas can certainly be a pain in the butt. Canvas isn't necessarily super intuitive, but so in many ways, if you're giving your students, I'm talking obviously from a teacher perspective, but if I have to learn how to use a bunch of different applications and a bunch of different tools, that can be a whole nother level of challenge for teachers and students, right? So it's like, well, um, we don't want to sort of take away from like, trying to keep things simple and keep students focused on various tasks. Okay, so let me go. I know I just wanted to, open up a space so we could have a few conversations, of course, and I'll put the third and fourth. Um, and we can move through these relatively quickly. And then I'll get to the sort of presentation because I want to make sure I get to that stuff before we sort of sign off here. So that now that education has moved mostly online, now that we're in this age, and this is sort of a topic, I'm sure, of perhaps fatigue as well. But now that education has moved mostly online, do you feel that technology has overall enhanced or hindered your education? In other words, with this new world of Zoom, essentially, that we're living in relation to our educations, um, do you feel like I mean, prior to this, I would say that there has been, for the most part, a kind of very rosy lens look at technology in relation to education. A lot of people would write, I mean, outside of the things that I mentioned in terms of people talking about, on the nightly news, how cell phones lead to addiction and distraction, which I'm not saying those things don't happen. But for the most part, like online classes and virtual reality and all these tools, for the most part, have been very much considered sort of like with a rosy lens, meaning that most of the time there's a lot of optimism, right? As I talked about in the M3 overview, right, there's a tendency for us to either have kind of a doomsday scenario with technology, like pretty soon all these robots are going to take our jobs, and I'm not going to say there isn't valid points in those things, or one of these days robots are going to take over the world and blah blah, or the cell phone is going to make us all stupid and we'll never read a book again. Or on the flip side of that, we think about how the cell phone has allowed us to stay in touch with everybody globally, and Zoom is allowing us to have sort of classes with the whole, with a diversity of population than we ever had before, or whatever it might be. There's a tendency for us to think of technology in very sort of, it's the best thing in the world or it's the worst thing in the world terms, particularly in sort of like mainstream media. So when we're actually in it, I mean, I feel like before this pandemic, a lot of people were like, online classes and all these different sort of applications that we can use, and Canvas and all this stuff that's, on discussion boards and whatever it might be, and online polls and whatever it might be. There was a lot of sort of hyped up thinking. I'm not saying it's undeserved, maybe it is, but how do you guys feel? Do you feel like this whole experience that we've all been forced into, not just you, but we've been forced into, has enhanced or hindered your education?
I don't know. I feel like in the middle with both, like there are
Hmm.
positives, but then there are some negatives, but depending on
Good.
how you learn best. But like for me, it was like, I don't know, the routine of like getting up every day to go to school and then like
Mm.
transitioning into like everything being online was like, oh my God. But I don't know, I kind of like adapted to it and it wasn't as bad as I thought it was gonna be. It's just I feel like it's more independent now and
Hmm.
like okay, so like you have a class at this time and it's like up to you if you're gonna join the Zoom call and keep up with your work and stuff like that.
Oh, interesting. So you feel like, and maybe that independence could, do you feel like that independence, and this isn't just for Sheila, and thanks Sheila for that. Do you feel like that independence has, well, I guess I was going to say, do you feel like that independence has allowed you to sort of understand your education differently? Like, in other words, like something like, well, it's sort of, since it's really up to you, it's like, hey, we're going to have a Zoom call. Um, it'd be great if you're there. I mean, perhaps most of the day we would feel like education can be kind of a chore. Like, okay, like you said, I got to get up, I got to be at class at so and so time, and I guess you got to wake up and go to a Zoom call. But in many ways, it's sort of, a lot of things are sort of optional in some sense. I mean, technically, we can just turn our Zoom on and shut our camera off and go watch cartoons or play video games. Do you feel like, Sheila or others, that it has changed your relationship to your education? And then Trevor's got a really interesting comment. So, I mean, that was kind of a weird question I asked, but I just feel like one of the differences that I felt when I came to college, of course, and this is, was that, there was a lot more independence, of course. Like, I wasn't living at home. I was living on campus, or I was living off campus, but nearby campus. And it was like, my college class, suddenly it was like, I was responsible for much more, for being there and for doing the work and getting the work done, and sort of, taking care of myself and doing my laundry and all that stuff. I was much more independent, which was also making me, or forcing me, to try and be a lot more responsible for stuff that normally was either taken care of or they didn't have to worry about. Um, and I feel like that changed. I mean, this is maybe a hindsight thing. Maybe I didn't realize it at the time, but I feel like that made me realize, like, okay, well, I might as well make of this what I can, right? So as opposed to, like, oh, like going to high school, it was like, all right, I got to get up and go to high school. And, I didn't really love high school, to be honest with you. So it was like, it felt a little bit more like a chore in high school. Not that I loved college and thought it was amazing. I mean, I liked college a lot better. And I think that had something to do with the fact that, um, it was kind of up to me more. It made me appreciate it more. Like, okay. Um,
Yeah, like I feel like I don't prioritize it as much as I did in high school, but like I feel like that's something I
hmm,
need to fix to, like, I don't know, better my education. It's-
good point. So yeah, so it's kind of like, well, like a sink or swim scenario.
Yeah.
You
And
sort of have to, yeah, you have to sort of like, well, okay, um, it's sort of up to you. And more than ever, these things are up to, so much more is put on the student nowadays, I think, in this scenario, right? Which is to say, normally we could just sort of show up to class, and I'm not trying to have like a negative view here, but sort of Sheila mentioned this. Like, normally we would have like a regular routine, like we would see each other every Tuesday and Friday at 10 a.m. And, on days that you're super tired, you could just show up and sort of just sit in the back of the classroom, and not have to, like, do too much. And you can, but in this case, it's kind of like with Zoom. I find if I'm going to get anything out of it, sure, I can just sit on Zoom and not participate and not do anything. And I probably won't gain very much. But, in some cases, I'm going to get a lot more if I'm like really trying to stay on top of things, and that can be challenging. But at the same time, I think there's a lot more put on each of us as individuals. Like, there's a lot more you have to keep track of. There's a lot more you have to sort of stay on top of, and in that case, it sort of forces you to try and be more engaged, to try and get stuff out of your education. Trevor kind of provides a good sort of flip side to this, saying that, and I'm sure everybody can see that in the chat, but it definitely hindered it a lot with my education, because I feel like I need to be in person to really gain the information fully. And some online is good, but I need face to face. And I would think that, there might be other people in here that really feel the same way. I know I feel the same way, that, just there's a lot. And I think I realized this. To question number 4, I say, what do you feel that we have learned about what is best for education and learning from this experience? One of the things I do feel is that the face-to-face component or one of the things that I feel that this has really shown me, is how important the face-to-face component can be, um, and is, in my opinion. And I knew that somewhat from teaching a lot of online classes and hybrid classes, but I think certainly now I feel like there's things that you get, even just being in the same room with somebody, or the same classroom with somebody, and the group especially. There's a lot to be learned there, even if you're not necessarily having the most dynamic conversation in the world. it just builds a sense of community. It builds a sense of connection. It builds a sense of continuity. There's a lot of things like that, I think, that become really important towards education. Other things about the questions 3 or 4, and then I'll move on, because like I said, I appreciate Malik, Sheila, Trevor, and appreciate everybody's comments here. I guess an interesting question would be, just real quick, for a quick poll in the chat, let me ask you guys this. How many of you would prefer in the spring, and this is not going to go on your record or anything, I'm not going to be holding you to this. How many of you would prefer in the spring to have some sort of, for the spring to be face-to-face? Let's say there's no pandemic at all, okay? Let's just say the pandemic is gone, and ideally that's the case. How many of you, and you just type yes in the chat, would want to go back to traditional face-to-face education? Okay, a lot. Pretty much. Okay, good. Amir, thank you. Ada, TJ, Keela, and okay. I mean, the vast majority, I think, of those of us that are in here, right? There's 18 of us in here. So the majority of us certainly would want to have face-to-face component, and then, but also perhaps some online. Trevor as well. Okay, great. Thank you guys. Okay, so let's move on. I realize that I'm coming up to an hour here, so I want to move forward with sort of some ideas about how we can start to think about this new essay. So one thing I want to mention, I'm going to sort of go through these things a little bit quickly, but again, speak up if you want me to slow down or go over something. I wanted to sort of give us a little perspective about what we've done so far in this module. And all of these modules are designed in a way to sort of build us through, or work us through, what they call scaffolding, scaffold us through a writing process, right? So our very first discussion board, we talked about, we explored, and this has been sort of a very similar process with each module. We explored different interests that I might have as far as fields of interest that I might have for a viable focus. In our fourth industrial revolution, we're just doing a little bit of reading to sort of see, get a sense of context about how technology is changing in our society. And then with our annotated bibliography, we're really sort of doing research about how technologies, or what technologies that are out there that are changing my selected field of interest, starting to sort of narrow down onto a focus and really sort of just get a sense of what are some of the conversations that are out there, and what are some of the technologies that are having an effect upon my field of interest. Now, that being said, I want to emphasize that we're not writing a research report, okay? The reason why we have subclaims in our support paragraphs is because you need to be making your own analysis of those different elements. So when we're just talking about education, right? For example, Malik brought up that the online reader or textbooks and the Kami application, and then he would want, if he was writing about that, I'm not saying that he is, but if I was thinking about developing a subclaim, I would make a subclaim about sort of online textbooks or editable textbooks, and then have some sort of analytical point about how they allow for a stronger sense of convenience as well as access, right? And then I would make that analysis and then maybe bring in a quote from an outside source to back that up, rather than saying in a support paragraph, in this article, it says that that's what we did for the annotated bibliography. The annotated bibliography, though, the research here is not what your paper is about. Your paper is about your selected field and how technology is shaping it. So all of your subclaims should be based out of your own ideas, right? I'm just explaining, look, there's a lot of good here and a lot of bad here. There's a lot of good and a lot of bad with almost anything. We need to be making an argument. How do I feel overall? that technology is having a productive or counterproductive effect on my selected field of interest. So if we look at the actual, go back to, and this should be very familiar, go back to our prompt here. For our third module, we'll develop a critical analysis of how current technology is shaping and transforming a selected field of interest, and argue how these transformations have consequence and significance for a social issue. So the first thing that this prompt is asking us to do is to make an analysis, how current technology is shaping and transforming your field, your selected field of interest, right? So if we look at the prompt itself, that is a question that's directly in there. That is what I am analyzing. Then when it comes to my argument, right, what it's asking me to argue is how these transformations have consequences and significance for a social issue. So I'm trying to take I'm going to be taking a position, right, as we've done with all these papers. With our first paper, we're talking about whether or not we felt our song is having an effective or significant impact. In our second essay, we focused on whether or not we feel our documentary is getting people to really critically engage with a social issue. And then in this paper, we're thinking about whether or not these technological changes and effects are having a sort of valuable or productive or problematic or counterproductive effect on our field of interest, right? So it's important that we remember we're not writing a research report. We're writing an argumentative analysis. So with that research, with the annotated bibliography, and I'm going to sort of push ahead. I want to get to a couple examples here. So Nick was doing some research into sports broadcasting industry. And so what am I looking for when it comes to my actual research articles? What am I keeping an eye out for? A number of different things. One, though, is to keep an eye out for things that are going to help me with my analysis. In other words, elements. So the elements, which are in our subclaims, the elements would be specific technology. So here's Nick writing about an article he found. This article talks about the new technology in the sports broadcasting industry and the new techniques that companies are using. One of these techniques are visuals, and this is where broadcasting networks can show some creativity. So right there, you have a sense of an element, these kind of visuals or these graphic visuals or whatever you want to call them, these digital visuals, and how they allow for some, increased creativity. Broadcasting networks can use different graphics or visual representation to make their broadcast less bland and more unique. And these visuals are important for a broadcast. It gives the network a chance to stand out or set them apart from a different broadcasting network. So if I'm thinking about my analysis, how current technology is shaping and transforming a selected field of interest, you're right. In some sense, Nick sort of has the development. Well, the element here could be these kind of visuals, right? These digital visuals or these, whatever I don't know what the exact term for them is. Not that you need an exact term, but these kind of cut pieces or set pieces in some sense, where it's like you have the visual. I mean, I was watching the Monday Night Football game last night, and it seems like it's every 10 minutes or 15 minutes during the game they bring in some graphic visual that's produced to sort of demonstrate how terrible one team is or how good the offense is of one team and how whatever, giving you some sort of context about the game. So what analytical point might be here? Well, just in this research, Nick notes, this idea of creativity and also networks standing out, right? Creating a sort of unique identity, right? So that, ESPN, which was the Monday Night Football game was on, they've got their own visuals team, obviously, and they have a very unique, they do their own style of all these different visuals that in many ways gives them a unique identity. I mean, even the Monday Night Football song, right, which precedes ESPN, right, and wasn't written by ESPN, but they obviously bought the rights to it. That has a very sort of identifying trademark and a notion of creativity as opposed to just broadcasting the game. So I can start to look for things that I can make an analysis out of in my research. So let's take a look at just one more. this is Amanda writing about filmmaking and how technology is changing it. Fong and Zhang both discuss how one of the new digital technology that is approved in film production is cameras. For example, the function of new digital HD cameras have improved in quality to the point where it surpasses people's eyesight. As for the internet, it complicates and diversifies the market of the film industry. It can use big data to see audiences' preferences and what they can do to satisfy them. So here we have two different sort of elements that are coming up in this article that Amanda is annotating. One is this idea of HD cameras that have it, so that could be the actual element in a subclaim, and how they have this ability to surpass people's eyesight. Amanda, of course, would want to develop, well, why does that matter? Why is that important? What is the consequence of that to have a stronger subclaim? But I can start to mine my research for different ideas to develop my own analyses. We also have this idea of the internet and the use of sort of crowdsourcing, if you will, right? Actually doing, you can have a sort of test audience, using big data to see audiences' preferences. This reminds me of a theater production in which when you walk in the lobby, this is theater, it's not film, but in the theater, you can walk in and there's instructions about going onto an application, and they send you an email if you bought tickets, I think, to do this ahead of time. But you can actually select what kind of show you want to see in terms of the ending of the show. Like, do you want it to be sort of, tragic? Do you want it to be kind of, tragic comic? Do you want it to be kind of, celebratory? Do you want this, and then the cast who's doing the play has actually practiced 3 or 4 different endings to the, or maybe 3 or 4 different scenes that can be changed according to the audience preference. So you can sort of match, I guess, your show to people's preferences more clearly. It sort of reminded me of that. But here I can start looking for my research about things that can start to lead to subclaims, right? I obviously want to be writing those and developing those subclaims in my own terms, but I'm making points about, I'm not just reporting, I'm making a point that, here the use of the internet allows, filmmakers to get a better sense of audience preferences, and therefore create films that will not only be more profitable because you're making things that there's already a demand for, but perhaps will also be more engaging and satisfying for viewers. So notice how I'm making a subclaim there. I'm not simply just sort of articulating, I'm not just reporting on this idea. So that's where we can start to think about how to develop analysis with argument, right? What social issue is at stake? What consequences for that issue? Just looking at the research here, there isn't necessarily a whole lot in terms of a larger social issue. But then again, there might be, if you think about something like this idea of connecting with audiences in the film industry and film production, right? Obviously, one of the primary goals here is to sort of make money. And the way you make money is by making things that are, that are highly entertaining, and having a film industry that can really sort of generate profit will lead to growth of the industry and so on and so forth. So there I'm talking about the way in which the film industry is really sort of expanding and also becoming much more engaging for viewers. And that can start to lead to what social issues at stake? Well, this idea of the growth of the industry itself, but making our entertainment much more engaging and sort of much more suited to or fitting our kind of desires and our needs and our demands, right? And that will allow us to sort of have more, in that sense, maybe we'll have an entertainment industry that is much more sort of in line with the people's desires and interests. It has that kind of consequence to it. So I can start thinking about what are some analytical subclaims that I can develop from doing my research, as well as what kind of larger argument might I think about in terms of social issue and consequence for that social issue. Okay, so going back to what we're trying to do, analysis, right? How current technology is shaping and transforming a selective field of interest. And our argument is how these transformations have consequences and significance for a social issue. So this is all going to be very familiar to you. My subclaims are going to be based on, like I was just demonstrating, how different elements of technology are having certain consequences, right? Meaning, how does, we talked about, we just looked at Nick's thing about the visuals in sports broadcasting. Well, how does it have, what are the consequences of those visuals for that sports broadcasting industry? Well, it allows for more creativity and allows for allows for networks to establish an identity or an individuality, right? And then with my argument, right, I'm thinking more about how these transformations have an overall sort of consequence. So when we're talking about how technology affects education, right, we were probably thinking both good things and bad things. And like I said, inevitably that's going to be the case. But my job here is to actually take an argumentative stance. So there's a couple of ways of dealing with that. One is that I don't want to just simply say like, well, there's good things and bad things. I want to instead say that overall, these technologies are having a positive or empowering impact. Sure, there's problems here and there. But overall, I do feel that these technologies are actually enhancing or helping the social issue. They have consequence and significance in a positive way. Or I could say overall, I feel like they're actually creating more problems. Maybe I feel like, the technologies that are coming into, the sports, or let's say maybe I feel like the technologies that are coming into sort of politics. I can't remember who was writing about politics, but somebody was. Maybe it was Elysia. I can't remember. My apologies. But maybe I feel like the technology that is now so much at play in politics is actually creating more problems than it is. Sure, there's benefits, right? It allows candidates to reach out to more people. It allows for things to go viral. Elysia says it was probably me. But maybe I feel overall that the technology there is actually creating more problems. So the other way to deal with this is just to be more specific. It's not about good or bad only. It's about how we can think about the ways in which, like, let's say I'm talking about technology in relation to, Malik was writing about a physical education class, right? And so maybe I want to just talk about, it's not necessarily that technology is all good or all bad in a physical education class. The idea is to find the kind of right balance, right, in relation of technology within a physical education class. That yes, you can use these tools, but you want to limit them or keep them. You don't want the whole class to, obviously in a physical education class, you don't want a bunch of people sitting down at computers or sitting there with iPads and not doing any physical activity. So obviously balance. So the idea is that I'm making a more, we're no longer making arguments about sort of debates that seem to have only two sides, right? Like perhaps we did in high school. Instead here, I'm making an argument about how technology is creating or having some sort of overall consequence or significance for a social issue. So let's say I'm talking about, middle school education or whatever, and I'm talking about how technology, it's not that it's all good or all bad, the changes that are taking place, but I'm going to make an argument about giving access to people of all classes and all backgrounds, right? So technology allows us to actually provide people, with free online textbooks and, access to the material in terms of accessing the material through our computers and not having to sort of, I can learn from, if I don't have a car or if I can't access public transportation, I can learn remotely or whatever it might be. But my argument is going to be based on this idea in the way in which technology is increasing access to education like never before, right? So for people who live way out in rural areas where there really is no, and they can't afford perhaps, they're of a class bracket where they can't afford to go away to college or can't afford to, commute all the way into the city to go to X and X university. Here they have a way to access that education the way they never did before, even on a global scale. So my argument is going to be more specific than just saying like, oh, this is doing, there's good and bad. Of course, there's good and bad. But what are the ways in which we can see how this technology is is having a specific sort of consequence and significance. So central claim, and I'm gonna sort of move. I was gonna make this a little more interactive, but I'm gonna move through these things pretty quickly. Just realize I have a little red dot here. That's neat. So like I mentioned, we want to make sure that we want to be talking about whether or not this is productive or problematic and why. So what I've done here in my central claim statement. So what I've done here is I've put up 3 different examples of central claims. And I'm going to read through them relatively quickly. But the idea here was for everybody to choose which one they feel is the strongest in terms of making sure, now that we've talked about making sure that you have a position, you're taking a stance, right? You're not just reporting your research. You're taking an argumentative stance about whether or not you think the technological changes in your field or certain technological changes in your field of interest are leading to something productive or leading to something problematic. So today's technological trends of virtual reality and video games and physical therapy are having both positive and negative effects on the field. While these technologies are giving more access to patients, there is also a possibility for misuse and furthering injury. Number 2, today's technological trends in physical therapy are changing the field in significant ways, from the use of video games and virtual reality to assist patients. And then number 3, today's technological trends of virtual reality and video games and physical therapy enhance patient engagement, and optimize the performance of standard therapeutic exercises to provide an exceptional patient experience. Ultimately, this supplies all patients with an equal opportunity for rehabilitation, making it an American universality. So you could probably tell right out of the gate, just in terms of the depth and the detail it has, the 3rd central claim is the most effective central claim here. And the reason for that is because we have a clear sense of a position, right? They are saying that overall, they feel that the latest technological trends enhance patient engagement, right? So it's productive, right? Or at least that they're taking a stance. And they also have a sense of consequence, in terms of optimizing performance and providing an exceptional patient experience. And they also have a sense of larger significance. So what? Why does this matter? It supplies all patients with an equal opportunity for rehabilitation, making it an American universality. So we have that sense of the kind of 3 layers, if you will, in terms of what is the sort of overall consequence of these things and the larger significance of that. The first one says that the technological trends are having both positive and negative effects, and that's probably true. But here's the thing: is we want to make sure we're taking an argumentative stance. So it doesn't really take a stance. Now they can address those positive and negative things, and we're going to talk about possibly using a counter argument paragraph. But you want to sort of come down on a certain side. And in terms of critical analysis and critical argumentation, I'm trying to provide my own perspective about whether or not I think the technological trends overall are having a productive effect or having a problematic. I'm not just here to report that there's both good and bad. Certainly there is, like I said, but we want to make sure we're taking a stance. And then with the second one, we really just don't have any sort of, it's not really an argument. It's just a description that technology is changing the field in significant ways. It's very general. In what ways, we don't really say. And then from the use of video games and virtual reality, we just list the different technologies. So we don't really have an argumentative stance about, or say it's significant ways. We don't know if those ways are good or bad, quote unquote, or productive or problematic. We don't know what specifically those ways are, and we don't really have a sense either of, a sense of consequence and significance there. So in that sense, the 3rd central claim here is the one that's fully developed, has that sense of a position, has that sense of consequence, and has that sense of significance. Okay, almost done. So with subclaims, as you know, we want to make sure we have, right, the subclaims are the first sentences of our support paragraphs. And our subclaims are what represent our analysis, right? So this I'm actually taking, again, I mentioned that Malik had written about physical education classes, and it's just, reading through all those annotated bibliographies, just a lot of interesting stuff that, one of the things that's kind of, at least for me, is really insightful about this process is, I'm learning a lot, as hopefully we all are when we look at these invention posts, learning a lot about how technology is having these different effects in all these different fields. So one of the things that Malik had read about in his annotated bibliography was an article that was talking about students recording their own videos as part of their physical education classes. So here's 4 different subclaims that I was thinking could come out of that. And one of these is going to be the most effective. So students recording their own videos is one of the new activities found in current physical education classes. Now notice here, this one isn't that effective because, again, a subclaim is an analytical statement, right? It tells my reader what I'm going to focus in on that paragraph and the point I'm going to make. Here we have a clear sense of the element, what I'm going to focus in on the paragraph, students recording their own videos. But I don't really say what is the effect and consequence of that? What is the value of that? Well, we just, right now, this subclaim is just saying it's one of the new activities. So we have an element, we don't really have an analytical point. It's not really an analytical statement. Look at number 2, students recording their own self-reflection videos are an exciting and powerful addition to the physical education class. Here we do have a sense of how the author feels about these new videos. They say they're exciting and they're powerful, but we kind of lack detail. What is the value of that? How are they powerful? So we could use a little more detail in that analytical point. Physical education classes can now create more responsibility in students and allow them to personalize their achievement goals. Now here we have a strong analytical point, the sense of more responsibility in students. It allows them to achieve and personalize their achievement goals. Great. But notice that the element is no longer really specific anymore. We're just talking about physical education classes in general. Instead, I want to make sure my element is specific as well. So you've heard me say it 1,000 times, and I'm sure you want to throw tomatoes at me for it. With those subclaims, we want to have a focused element, and we want to have an analytical point with a sense of effect and consequence. So number 4 is the most effective in terms of making an analytical statement, a subclaim, based on the focused element of students recording their own self-reflection videos and what the effective they are and what the consequence is. Students recording their own self-reflection videos allows them to take more responsibility for their physical education and personalize their achievement goals. So notice I'm very clear, I'm specific in the element. I'm going to write this paragraph, I'm going to analyze students recording their own self-reflection videos, and I'm going to show how they lead to more responsibility and personalizing their achievement goals. Now, those ideas about what those self-reflection videos are doing that's me interpreting, right? I'm analyzing. This is my analysis, my argument, right? So my interpretation needs to come into play, and that's what the analytical point there is doing. Somebody could make a completely different point about self-reflection videos, right? And maybe they feel like they aren't a productive thing. Then they would go in a different direction as far as that analytical point is concerned, right? So these are things I want to think about. I feel like there was a little bit of a tendency when we started doing research, academic research, like, oh, I'm just going to sort of, and when we do an annotated bibliography, the annotated bibliography, yes, you're doing writing that's just about the source. But when it comes to my paper, I'm writing an argumentative analysis. I want to make sure I have central claim and subclaims to fit. So making sure I have that specific element and consequence in each of my subclaims is key. So just to put this back up here, and this is to end things, to close things down, my analysis is about how current technologies are shaping and transforming a selective field of interest, right? So how my subclaim should be based on how different elements of technology are having certain consequences, just like we just looked at. And then my argument is going to be all about how these transformations and have consequence and significance for a larger social issue. So how these transformations are productive or problematic in significant ways, right? Overall, do I feel that, yes, there's going to be good and bad, but overall, do I feel like these technologies and these transformations are having a productive consequence and significance, or are they having a more problematic and causing more problems in relation to a social issue? All right, guys, that was way longer than I hoped, and I apologize for that, but I'm going to step out of the share here and sort of come back to everybody. We actually technically sort of went for our regular class time here. Sorry, let me just get this thing figured out. So I thank you guys for sticking with me. Are there any questions before I step away? Of course, we'll be posting this recording in Canvas discussions by the end of tonight. All right, it takes me a little while to sort of render it and then upload it to YouTube and blah, 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 and get all that stuff together because I got to teach classes all day. But are there any questions before I step away, either about what we just talked about or about the assignment? As you know, let me just say this and then I'll open it up for questions. By the end of tonight, we want to reply to the invention posts of Carly, Ada, Daniel, and Nick. And really some cool stuff. At least, I mean, that's my personal opinion, but really some interesting things happening with those invention posts, and it'll give us a sense. Not only do we get to sort of give them a sense of how they can continue to build their ideas in our replies, but it also gives us a sense of what the other things that people are thinking and how they're developing their arguments and analyses. Any questions before we go? All right, guys, if you don't mind, just type here in the chat. And it was sort of good to see you guys again, even though I can't see you. But it's always good to sort of be in the same room, quote unquote, room with you guys. And good luck with this week is all invention posts. That workshop draft is next week, a week from today. So go ahead and look ahead, and I'll be getting those RD2s back to you by the end of tomorrow night. I'll be unmuting them, and of course, please make sure you listen to the feedback of the screencast on those to help you with sort of thinking about your RD3. All right, everybody, take care.
Wait, so tonight we're just waiting for them to reply or like make their post, and then are we commenting anything or just?
The posts are already there. The
Oh.
posts were up. The posts were up there by the end of the night last night. So Carly, Nick, Daniels, and Ada's posts are all up there in the
Okay.
M3 invention post discussion board. So you need to reply. This for
Yeah.
everybody. You need to reply to 3 of those.
Okay.
You don't need to reply to all 4. You need to reply to 3, though you can get those CP3 points if you reply to all 4.
Okay, thank you.
I have a
All right.
question.
Yeah.
So I did one of the posts. I'm still responding to the other 3, right? Or no?
Yes, Carly, you are.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So so those of you who did the post, you obviously don't respond to your own post unless you're a total egomaniac, like me. No, you don't respond to your own post. You respond to your peers' post, the other 3. All right, guys. Have a good rest of the week, and I will talk soon and be in touch. Take care of each other and stay strong and stay
Thank
positive.
you.
I know it's not easy to do. Ciao.
Have a
Take
good
care.
day.
Have a good day. Absolutely.
Thank you.